I need to.
Starting in verse 1, Joshua 9. When all the kings heard about Jericho and Ai, those who were west of the Jordan in the hill country, and the Judean and foothills, and all along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea towards Lebanon, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, and they formed a unified alliance to fight against Joshua and Israel. And when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and Ai, they acted deceptively. They gathered provisions and took out worn-out sacks on their donkeys and old wineskins and cracked and mended. They wore old patched sandals on their feet and thoroughbred clothing on their bodies. Their entire provision of bread was dry and crumbling. And then they went to Joshua in the camp of Gilgad and said to him, and the men of Israel, we have come from a distant land. Please make a treaty with us. And the men of Israel replied to the Hivites, and perhaps you live among us. How can we make a treaty with you? And they said to Joshua, we are your servants. And then Joshua asked them, who are you? And where have you come from? Let's pray. Father, impact our hearts today with this word. Change us, mold us, give us boldness, give us a desire to pursue truth as we have never pursued it before. Use your word today, Father, to shape our lives. Here's the thing. One of the first the second, really stupid, bad decision that Joshua made. Discernment is everything. Listen, if you don't take time to understand what a man believes, you will never win into Christ. When you're in class and the professor is giving you some horse hockey of some theory, and you're sitting there going, whoa. And if you don't take time, listen, these dudes, they did their homework. Israel had 3 ways of dealing with strangers. 1, they're going to hack your head off and burn your body, and burn everything, including the animals in the little pen, even the cute little bunnies. Siege warfare. Nuked. Or, if you fought a little bit against them and then surrendered, they kill all the men and then keep everything else for themselves, including your wives and kids. The third thing was, you surrender from the get-go. And you say, we'll be your servants. These dudes did their homework. They understood the worldview of Israel, and they played them. Now listen, this whole story of Joshua, going back to Rahab, when the 2 spies went into the whorehouse and hanging out with her. By the way, yes, she was a prostitute, so let's call it what it is. They're saying to her, she's saying to them, we've heard the stories. We've rehearsed the stories. Do you realize that we focus as Christians so much on, the Israelis, they lack faith and then they wandered the desert. They wandered the desert in sight of the promised land, which means those in the promised land saw Israel in sight for 40 years. To the place where these 2 spies are finding out, whoa, these people are scared to death of us. They've been rehearsing their doom. Men in Black. Anybody watch that movie? Do you remember in Men in Black 2 where Tommy Lee Jones is in the little science lab and he goes, what's that thing? And he takes his finger and presses into that little gooey ball, and everybody in the little gooey ball is running screaming, we're doomed! Ah! That's how the people on the other side of the Jordan lived. They heard the stories of Israel. Of Egypt. They heard the stories of how the Egyptian army was wiped out without a battle. These people were scared to death, and by the time they got through Ai, these people were planning and trying to figure out, how do we survive? You see, Worldview matters. John MacArthur says this. Technology is not always our friend. Discernment is described as this. In its simplest definition, discernment is nothing more than the ability to decide between what is truth or error, right or wrong. Discernment is a process of making careful distinctions in our thinking about truth. In other words, the ability to think with discernment is synonymous with our ability to think biblically. I'm doing this 30 years. I'm not meaning to offend anybody in this room who are youth workers or youth leaders, but I personally hate entertainment-based youth ministry. You talk about 6 subjects, the cool subjects. We don't teach critical thinking. It's the biggest problem that we have as church planters. We get guys coming out of seminary who don't know how to exegete a community, that don't know how to critically think, that don't know and understand worldviews. Apologetics isn't part of our Christian dialogue and our discipleship. For us to thrive, and this whole series, by the way, is to give you the tools to thrive, is for you to be able to take a look at a worldview and disseminate it and understand, where is this person coming from? Some verses I'm going to give you. And I'm going to give you a practical way of how to do it. 1 Thessalonians 5:21 and 22 teaches that it's the responsibility of every Christian to be discerning. But examine everything carefully, it says. Hold fast to which is good. Abstain from every form of evil. The Apostle John issues a similar warning, saying, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. You see, discernment isn't optional. It's the key to living an uncompromising life. It gives you the ability to exercise discernment in every area of your life. You see, for failure to do so leads you to not truth, but error. Christians are being subject to false teachings, and here's what's happening. We've seen this politically. There are Christians that are more, and I got in trouble for this, by the way. I made a determination 2 years ago that this election period we were not going to allow the Bible-thumping right-wingers propagate their jargon. I said, church needs to be about Jesus, not who you're going to vote for. I don't want to hear that because you don't believe in Rand Paul, you're not of God. Yeah, I had a guy in our church that was that way. I have people that I know, listen, they're more patriots than they are believers. Nothing wrong with patriotism. There's nothing wrong with loving your flag. There's nothing wrong with loving your country and believing in voting your conscience and your convictions. However, when that supersedes who Jesus is, we have a problem, and you're going to have a problem with me. Because whether you're left, right, centralist, or whatever, it's all under the lordship. A friend of mine said it this way: the world's problems are the world's problems. We know who has the answer. And you see, what happens is that we allow worldviews to dictate how we live. You're going to have professors in school, and this message is so timely for so many young people. Many of you are going off to college. And you know what? I hear this at least 5 times every single year for the last 20 years. A student will come to me and say, I was in such and such a class. I've heard it in biology class. I've heard it come out of psychology class. I've heard it being done in a women's studies class. I've heard it done in a culinary arts class. Professor gets up and saying, Is anybody a professing Christian? Poor student, proud of who they are, raises their hand. And the professor says, I'm an atheist. And my whole mission this semester is to convince you otherwise of what you believe. Nothing to do with the subject. They have an agenda. You know, you might, and nothing against where you might live in Central Texas, but you're going to go to school in Austin. Austin isn't cowboy country. There are people there who don't believe what your community might believe. And you see, here's where we get in trouble. And it's true here, and I see it in young people's eyes. It's their grandmama's faith, it's not their own. Where, you know, mom and dad dug a post hole for you. And God's brought some of these men in your life here, and women in your life, who are just godly mentors, you know, pastors, who have helped you build the rebar to put into that post hole. But my friend, as Josh McDowell once told me face to face, it's your job to pour the concrete. And here's what happens. If you don't pour the concrete, and that's all you have a pastor or a youth leader who's invested and helped you tie up that rebar, and you've had a mommy and daddy who helped you dig the right length of that hole, and if you haven't poured that concrete, and you go off to the world to school and try to build a house on that, guess what's going to happen? Tragedy. That's why 70% of all kids who are raised in church walk away from their faith when they're in college. Fact, bar none. It's because you haven't poured the concrete. You don't know how to critically think. You haven't owned your faith to the point where you know what you're talking about and you understand what they're talking about, so when you hear it, you identify it. I talk to Christians all the time, you know, because I'm out in the world working. I am so confused sometimes. Where did they get all these screwy ideas about Jesus? You know? That he was an angel with fluffy wings, and he spits fire bolts, and he doesn't send anybody to hell, don't you know? And even if you do, we can pray you out of it, and just, you know, people don't know what they believe. They assemble little bits and pieces, and they come up with a little worldview. Or they're diehards. The analytical folks are dangerous because they have studied. They are prepared for you. They've got it down, whether they're an existentialist or whatever. You know, they can quote Voltaire, they can quote all this stuff, and they can nail you on stuff, and you're sitting back saying, whoa, I feel like a deer in the headlights. Now, I'm not going to give you all the worldviews. I'm going to let you go back and Google that and get into that. But what I want you to do is I want you to start, I want to prick your heart today that you get thirsty, that you get hungry for truth, that you start pursuing after this, because here's the things. I want you to be able to understand, how do I break it down? What do I look for? Give you the first one. I always get ahead of myself in mind. I write things out and I get ahead of myself. College campuses. Now, I've been a university pastor and a university chaplain for quite a while now. And something that I've learned from all the other university guys, what is being taught on our campuses today is being shaped and modeled, and one day, within 20 years, will be the law of the land. That's why it's important for churches to have a presence on college campuses. What happens is, these ideas are put forth on college campuses, and then they trickle down to education. At the same time, they shoot down to the media. Media propagates it and promotes it, and it becomes part of social culture. And then we have to deal with it. And unfortunately, even my own denomination has abdicated their responsibility in the area of campus ministry to other para organizations, instead of encouraging churches to say, we need to plant a flag there and love on those people and win those people. Give you some ideas of why it's important to have this critical thinking, to be able to understand worldviews. Tiger Woods, I'm just giving you an example of understanding a worldview. Tiger Woods. How many know who Tiger Woods is? I thought I'd pick a subject, a person that you might all know. How many of you realize that he went through a serious scandal where he was married and he had at least one woman in every golf course in America? Okay? And who else understands that he got caught? Okay. Did you understand the struggle that he was having publicly dealing with the guilt? Dealing with the sin factor? And how it's ruined his career? It's totally messed with his whole psyche. Have any true golfers that follow that? It's true. That's what's happened. That's why it's not his injuries that have depleted his ability. He was this brilliant thinker. He was able to focus. And Brett Hume did a thing on Fox way back when it all was happening, and I discovered something about Tiger I didn't know. He was Buddhist. Anybody know anything about? Raise your hand if you know something about Buddhism, other than my campus guys in the back of the room. Here's the thing about Buddhism. Buddhism doesn't allow for forgiveness. It's not in there. It's not in their battery of who they are. Tiger was dealing with, I have this guilt, I have this shame, I have this frustration, I have all this stuff, and I have no capacity within myself to forgive myself. What blows me away is nobody else who loved Jesus approached him on that and called him on that and shared Christ with him on that. Why did I say that? Because that's one example of understanding when you hear all that, what's going on in a man's life, and if you understand what he believes and how he thinks, you'll be able to help him. You'll be able to be that agent of change, that instrument that where God meets, the rubber meets the road, where God has lined up the ducks, brought you into somebody's life, and because of your understanding of the worldviews, you're able to know where those people are, understand where they're coming from, and you're being able to interject truth into their life. Author Nick Pollard has a thing called the process of positive deconstruction. And that's the technique I'm going to give you this morning. So if you have pencil and paper, you want to write this down. There's 4 simple things. I want you to embrace it. I want you to think it. I want you to start talking amongst yourselves. Because once you understand these simple little steps, it can fortify you and give you the tools to be able to help yourself, protect yourself from trouble. Because you're going to get a professor, one of these days. Number 1, identifying worldview. You got to identify their worldview. Are they humanistic? Are they pluralistic? The 2 big things that we deal with here in Philadelphia are 2 things. 1, there is God. Let me tell you which one. It's where we start. There is a God. We don't talk about what Bibles do you read. We talk about there's a God. That's how basic it is here. And in some cases, we talk about which one. Joy and I, through our ministry in 2005, hosted with Rox Media one of the few domestic training for comic book writers in the world. They do it all overseas mostly, and they train believers to how to use their comic skills and comic writings to be able to create characters that are believers in stories, to be able to tell stories. And the 2 guys that we're best friends with, one is Paul Castiglia, who has written for Dark Horse Comics and Archie, and he's written stuff for Batman, and he's a writer, dear friend, dear believer, and Nate Butler, who was actually the artist for Archie for 26 years. And what we're doing, we're unpacking this stuff, and one night, after dinner, we were all hanging out in the hotel lobby, and we're just talking about stuff, and we start talking about anime. Anybody watch anime, read anime, look at anime? But it's okay, you don't have to if you don't want to admit it. It's cool. But the thing about anime is, and this is something I didn't know until I started having this conversation, is that it is chock full of Eastern mysticism. It's chock full of Eastern religions. And it propagates those viewpoints. Well, if you did not know that those stories and what story is depicting what Eastern religion, you might get, and I've seen this where kids get sucked into it. And they start practicing these things because their favorite character is doing this stuff, spell casting and all that kind of stuff. Well, that's just one example. You know, Harry Potter. Anybody know what Harry Potter movie? I happen to really enjoy Harry Potter. You know, my kids, when they were in grade school, were told mandatory reading Harry Potter. Now, also understanding that it's a very liberal school district, I know that what's going to come with that. So my wife, the genius that she is, and your better half guys, you single guys, you want to look for the right woman because she will save your bacon. I married a girl who was smarter than me. When it came home that we were told that our kids had to be immersed into the life of Harry Potter, we said, awesome. As a family, we read the book. As a family at dinner time, we talked about the chapters. As a family, we talked about the spiritual warfare and what was real and what was a myth in the stories. Where we were able to train our girls from a very, very young age, third grade, on how to think critically, how to disseminate what they were seeing. By the time they got to high school, my daughter had a senior reading list that included the book that they were going to spend one whole quarter on, called 50 Shades of Grey. And they were going to be in the syllabus of the class at high school talking about sadomasochism and bondage and all that kind of stuff. Well, I'm mild-mannered. My wife went nuclear because it was parents who picked the books. And she infiltrated it, and we were able to get our kids out of having to be subject to that. I've had writer friends, you know, being an artsy guy, I have writer friends who have done presentations to Disney, Nickelodeon, and other kids' channels. And it's scary what the programming people want in stories. Listen, I'm not saying all that to badmouth those things. I'm not saying all that to scare you off from ever turning on cable TV again. You know, what I'm trying to do is make you think about what you're looking at. As a dad, I never let my kids watch cartoons alone. Do I get an amen? Amen. You know why I did that? Because I watched that little Jimmy guy, the little Jimmy who Jimmy Neutron, and who's that other, the Fairly Odd Parents, okay? I watched those two programs and said, hey, look, every dad in America is stupid. And the house are ruled by moms who are unreasonable. And I sat back and said, that's wrong. That's a wrong worldview. My kids aren't going to buy into that. Well, we watched TV together. We talked about stuff. Why? Because worldview matters. First task of positive deconstruction is to identify the underlying worldview. This requires us to have a grasp of a wide range of worldviews. We cannot find something if we don't know what we're looking for. You have to be able to study worldviews. Because you might not be dealing with them in Baltimore, although I do believe you are. And I know you're dealing with it in Texas, because I know there's battles going on. There's battles everywhere. And if you aren't embracing and understanding what worldviews are, you're dead meat. You're leaving yourself wide open for the enemy to attack you. And next thing you know, you're sending a check to Clefro Dollar for his $50 million jet. You know? Why do people, you know, we have such a cushy, soft Christianity in America. You want to clear a room? Preach on sacrifice and suffering. You know? So listen, you got to identify the worldview. Second thing is, you have to analyze the worldview. What do I mean by that? Once we've identified a particular worldview, we can now move on to the next process, which is to analyze it. Essentially ask, is it true? To do this, it is best to employ three standard philosophies. Listen, you got to break it down. You have to look at what do they believe? Is there any truth present? And if there's truth present, you want to affirm the truth. Because that's a niche. Listen, I have found something about Catholics. Catholics make wonderful Baptists. Why? Because they have authority right. Okay? Catholics understand authority. I have no problem with people who come to Christianity who are Catholic. When I say as a pastor, we need to do thus and so, they said, yes, sir, let's go. There's never an argument. Whereas you get a Baptist in your church, he's going to organize a committee to discuss it before we ever consider going after it. You know? Listen, when you look at the worldviews, when you look at religions, you look at where's the truth present in their life. Because you see, that one truth gives you a jump board into the Bible, into the Word, that you can ever say, well, you know what? You're not totally wrong. You know, you ever have a conversation with a person and you start out with saying what you believe is all wet? You think how far you're going to get with that when you're talking with them? You know, you're an idiot for believing that, you know? I mean, what's he going to do? He's going to punch you in the mouth. When you sit back and say, I really understand what you believe. And, you know, I respect the fact that you believe thus and so. All of a sudden, you have a foothold. All of a sudden, you have the ability as a springboard to take them to the next step of truth, which is Christ. But, you know, if you don't understand what a Mormon's all about, if you don't understand what a Catholic believes, how are you ever going to get them to the place where you can talk about the real truth, the real gospel? The last thing that you're going to be looking for is discovering the error. You see, the thing that I have found about most people that are churchgoers is they start with the error and they stay on the error and they never get to the other part. We never take time. Listen, I was raised in a very fundamental Baptist church spiritually. When I came to Christ in college, I ended up going to an independent fundamental church. That's where I got saved. That's where I got grounded. And, you know, we wore the suit and tie to church, the three-piece vest. I still have my wide margin Cambridge, you know. It's not a sword, it's a club, you know. And I think a lot of times in our Christianity, we use the Word of God to club people to death. We start with error. We never take the time to understand what they truly believe. And we keep thumping on the error and ignoring the rest. The Bible says that if we are to be soul winners, we are to be wise. We need to understand worldviews. We need to understand, is there truth present in what they believe? If there's truth present in what they believe, if there's truth, we love kids, by the way. Anyway, if there's truth present in what they believe, let's break it down. Let's understand where the error is. Let's understand how do we help them navigate to more truth. And you gotta have discernment to do that. So I want to encourage you today. We need discernment. Did you see? Joshua didn't go far enough in dealing with those folks. He didn't do his homework. He just believed them. And then all of a sudden they had this camp of people that they gave credence to. They went down the street. You know what they did? They went down the street to take the next town. Guess what they found out? We had made a pact with those people and we can't touch them now. Or our word will be mud. Get in the Word of God. Grow in the Word of God. Start understanding the worldviews. And that will unlock the door for when you get people that are teaching stuff that don't match up with what you believe. Let's pray. Father, this morning I ask that you just touch our hearts, change our hearts. Help us to use this as a springboard to help us to go deeper into truth, deeper into your word, understanding and studying what the worldviews are, understanding other religions and understanding what they believe, but Lord, that are contrary to your word, what they believe that actually is present in your word, that we might use it as a tool to reach them. Lord, use us, change us, mold us in your Son's name. Amen. Bill, you got a song for us? Amen.